Greetings, Year 12. It is time for Lesson 8. A little bit delayed, but it's about the importance of contexts in your analyse and explain type responses, particularly in regards to the big issue. But we know this is true of our music videos, we know this is true of our advertising units as well. So let's have a look at the sort of things I am talking about. Right, so here are some very ugly dogs. The questions, I mean. And the idea is that this is about as horrible a question as one could be asked, right? There's an analyse one and explain one, but you could interchange those command words. Analyse how representations may invoke discourses and ideologies and position audiences. Right. So with that one there, they are asking you to pick out the representations, first of all, those values and types sort of constructed in the text, but make sure you go and get across to the discourses and ideologies. And I'm going to have a look at those words in a bit, but basically those outside factors that people believe in. I think that the core thing is that discourses and ideologies are about what the audience believe. And then they explain the way media language incorporates viewpoints and ideologies, referred to as say. That, I would argue, is the most horrible of the dogs that you will face, because you're trying to ignore representations. You've got these viewpoints and ideologies, these sets of beliefs, and then somehow you're trying to use links to. I'm struggling to be able to put this into nice words, nice and clearly. The link to the media language without talking about the ideas represented in between. But hopefully by the end of today's lesson, you will see how you can avoid discussing representation, do discuss media language, and still make nods towards what the audience believe. So here are the three doggy words that they like to put into these kinds of questions, and these are words that do turn up, especially those first two, in like university level papers, like discourses around the diaspora of black people because of post-colonial thought or something like that. Those kind of words, those words that you would definitely see when you go to university. Now, what does discourses mean? Discourses means, as far as the dictionary definition, written or spoken communication or debate. I like the word discussions, the discussions that people have, the people of different groups, so the different types of discussions that different groups have. Now, that's your job then to then think about what your ABC1 left wingers are thinking about in regards to the big issue. But we could also say about discourses and the discussions people are having about our music videos. So maybe you were talking about Burn the Witch, and that's also got an ABC1 left-wing audience, and those sort of worries about sort of xenophobia and the rise of the far right and stuff. But they're discussions. So discourses is discussions, the things people talk about and their concerns and worries. Ideologies is another very common word at university level. A system of ideas and ideals, especially one which forms the basis of economic or political theory and policy. Left-wing ideologies, right? Ideology is a self-supporting system of ideas and ideals. I think that's what's important. It's got an internal logic. So we know with sort of left-wing, more socialist ideals, the idea of equality of outcome for people, and that being race or gender or sexuality, and that ability to have an almost utopian society is what underpins left-wing ideologies, and all those things kind of work together. And viewpoints, that's the easier one. A person's opinion or point of view, but they're going to have those point of views based on their ideology, what they believe the world should be like. All right, and that's the core thing. So whenever you see these three words, it's what people believe about the world and how it should be, and it's going to be knowing your target audience that's going to be absolutely critical, because if you don't know how the audience think, you can't get in their heads and what those representations or that media language means to them. So super important to have that launch pad of target audience. Now, there is the use of the term context especially in analysed questions. And I've said to you that having context in analysed questions and explained questions is still always useful, because it helps frame a greater understanding of what the audience's response to the media language that's in it, or the representation that's in it, is. Now, when you have those words, viewpoints and ideologies and discourses, it's about what they believe, but it's about what they believe because of the way the world is, those social realities, those social cultural contexts. And what we know is the case in our country is those things on the left-hand side. In fact, it's more broadly about Western culture, but our country is an absolute scion of Western culture. You know, it's like us and America do have quite an overpowered influence on global culture, especially the music industry. It's a strange thing, but film as well. And so we have that kind of what's known as cultural imperialism. We have played out into, you know, what the world thinks is beautiful and the world thinks is successful. Obviously, America kind of lead the way in terms of the American dream. Anyway, let's have a look at our UK ones on the left-hand side. And the truth about our society is that this is how we behave. So that's the context. And then on the right-hand side, what are the left-wing beliefs about them? And this is shared by the audience, that left-wing ABC1 audience, but also the big issue editorial staff. And as an organisation, they know they're targeting those left-wing people. So it very often, and the same is true with newspapers, there is a shared contract, a shared set of beliefs between the audience and the publisher. So it is true that in our society we live in a celebrity culture where famous people in sports and entertainment are venerated and believed to be in some way superior for their actions. Sometimes they're just famous for being famous, if you're Katie Price. But the idea is, with that is true. The idea of the individual stars. Now, society's always been like that. There's always been demigods in, say, Greek society that are, you know, particularly famous, particularly respected for particular things. Now, with that, if we look on the right-hand side, the belief about that truth is that your left-wing audience do identify with the support offered by celebrities who endorse the big issue and the social problems it raises. It constructs those celebrities as socially responsible and selfless in some way. And, you know, there are copies of the big issue where you had, like, say, Robert Downey Jr., and this was during the course of sort of the Iron Man film franchise promotions, and there he was on the front cover. But with him, with, say, Robert Downey Jr., not only was he kind of respected for his stuff doing Iron Man, but he's done a load of independent films. He's a brilliant actor. He's done a lot of difficult content that deals with his own personal issues with drugs as well, and that kind of brings that to those performances. So that cachet that he brings and that difficulty with life that he brings is something that is respected by your left-wing audience that understand that kind of fragility of people on the margins of society. Now, globalization, internationalism. The world, as we can see, has become increasingly more global and interconnected through trade, through air travel and stuff like that, but also that diminishing of the nation state as separate and others and better than others. As a whole, there has been a bit of a rise of xenophobia after the last sort of 10 years or so, but generally speaking, we are much more interconnected, and we can see that with our big whole global COVID-19 pandemic crisis. Didn't take long for it to make its way across from China. Anyway, so the left-wing audience believe in and they identify with supporting global collective action on climate change and poverty. That's their belief about it. So with that, we can see those stories in the big issue about, say, fair trade, about climate change, and the need for international action, what different cities are doing about it. Welfarism. this is an interesting one. We have a bit of an interesting situation where in Britain we believe in looking after those less fortunate than ourselves. That's not necessarily a left-wing belief. It's quite a British belief in this, the power of the NHS and its role in being there for everyone. And yet right-wing people vote for the Tories and then underfund it for a decade. But left-wing people, they would understand that you need to actively invest in this and support people that are in need of charity. So actually that cuts a bit left and right. It's very British, whereas in America it's kind of survival of the fittest much more. It's kind of, you earn money so you don't become a bum. Anyway, so that's welfarism. That's a more difficult one to use, but certainly the next two are things that are very prevalent in left-wing thinking. Over the last 70 years, the world has become, certainly in the West and in Britain, a more gender equal society. You have a situation where women go out to work, where women have the same employment rights as men, very largely speaking, certainly in terms of pay. And this was only really evident and really actioned in law by the late 1960s. But by now, by the early 2020s, we've got a situation where men and women are both expected to go out to work. In fact, you need to in order to have a functioning household, to be fair, unless one of you's earning, mega bucks. Anyway, but that is really about the movement of feminism. Feminism, you had first wave feminism with, say, the need for voting rights for women and the suffragettes in the early part of the 20th century. Then you had sort of second wave feminism, which was much more misandrist. When I say misandrist, it's that sort of men-hating, in which case they were like, well, we've had 2 world wars. It's now the 1960s. Let's not have a third one because the Cold War looks like it's happening. They never burned their bras. That's commonly said, but they didn't. But certainly thinking about outside of the patriarchal culture. And then by the time you got to sort of the late 80s, sort of mid 90s onwards, you had what's known as third wave feminism, where the woman can have it all within the system and try to have that powerful job and get paid, but have those kids and have a nanny and sort of do it all. But this is all to do with feminism, and we see that that empowerment of women is not complete by any means, but certainly left-wing audiences believe in the greater pursuit of equality for women within society. The right to be heard, for example, certainly much more when you've got things like rape and sexual assault cases and stuff like that, when we've seen things like the Me Too movement. And there is a real look to spread this around the world in terms of, say, education for young women and girls in other parts of the world that aren't the West as well. So feminism is something that left-wing people believe in and is shared with the big issue as its producer. Multiculturalism. We have become, it is true, a much more multicultural society after the opening up of the British passport and the Windrush generation after the post-war period. We have Asian people from Pakistan and from India and the Caribbean, and we also have European immigration from our time when we were once in the EU. But certainly that mixing of cultures is respected, and the audience of left-wingers identify with the support for it, but also the suffering of minority ethnic groups within society, because those groups come here, they integrate into society, but there is a power hierarchy where the white rich men do dominate the poorer groups within society, and they see things like, say, the Grenfell Tower fire, where poor people, many of whom who were from ethnic minorities, weren't listened to about the safety of their tower block, and then look what happened. So there is very much that support for multiculturalism and that support for reducing the inequalities of multicultural society. Finally, and this links in with that, that's that general social inequality in capitalist society. Your left-wing people, they're the first ones to spot it, but it is a social truth. Capitalism has winners and losers, and the winners disproportionately win and the losers disproportionately lose. And the left-wing audience, they identify an opposition to the suffering caused by things like welfare cuts on the working poor. Basically, you could be working a minimum wage job or even a living wage job in this country, and you can have two people go out to work and someone's got to look after the kids. So maybe dad's going out full-time, the wife is going out part-time, and it will not be enough to make ends meet, with the property prices going through the roof because of chronic undersupply, for example, inflation, stagnating wages as a result of, say, government cuts to, or the stagnation, the reduction of wages to a point that's below inflation. Say it goes up by, say, 3% a year, so everything becomes 3% more expensive year on year on year, but you're only getting like a 1% pay rise, and then suddenly in about 5 years you're like, I'm about 10% less rich than I used to be, and I've still got the same bills going up. So that ability to see that problem within society that educated left-wing people have is something they're going to want information on, because they want to feel informed. So there's going to be promises of insight and information on these topics so that they can keep abreast of them and feel more knowledgeable about them and act on them if they are socially motivated to do so, which left-wing people tend to be. They tend to be a little less selfish and a bit more socially minded. Now, what does this mean for our normal paragraph structure? We know that we will normally be making a point, either about media language, about something you know that's on the front cover in terms of the visuals of the front cover that's promising something to the audience, or representation, which is that construction of ideas about a person or group or place. You point that out first, then you back it, then you get into the audience and industry stuff about, how this benefits the industry or how this promises an experience to the audience. But we normally say that we get to the bum end of a paragraph and, this benefits the audience and promises them insight on this topic because they value equality within society that is unequal because of capitalism, for example. So you bum, you bum end. Yes, so you make sure the back end of any paragraph is going to have some sort of context rounding out to the audience response. But what we're saying here is you're going to be looking to move that understanding of the link between the real world context pretty close to the point. Especially for the media language ones, like this is what's happening in society, therefore there's this media language on the page, and that's really where you need to be, and that means you can talk about it less at that bum end, at the back end there, because otherwise you'll just be repeating yourself. But it's going to be there somewhere in an analysed response or an explained style response. So what I want you to do is to read the two models about the Donald Trump front cover that I've given you. They are those two dog-type questions, and you're going to notice that especially with the media language one and the ideologies and viewpoints question that it comes with, we are really looking to reorder where we're going to face the question. But we're going to have context, but we're going to context front it, and you'll see what that looks like in my model in a bit. Make sure that in the media language question, of course, that even though it is alluding to ideas about the world, you never use the word represents, countertypes or stereotypes in a media language response, and also makes links to the identification with the audience ideas. All right, so that's where we're going to get our context and their beliefs that they want information on, and their beliefs that they identify with and support because they are left-wing people. So it should look a bit like this. Here's one of the paragraphs, but look what we've done. We've gone and context fronted the paragraph to make sure we're dealing with that viewpoints and ideologies. There really isn't much difference between the context and a value and ideology in this unit, because it's just about what people think about is the real world situation. So it is both. So let's have a look at the front there in purple. The big issue front cover clearly incorporates the left-wing audience's fears about the influence of right-wing populist Donald Trump on the world and its environment. Now, we could say that the context would be the rise of right-wing populism, but the belief they have is the fear of it. all right? But I think as long as you link it back to how they feel about the real world thing, then that's going to be values and ideologies and viewpoints. Then we back it, right? But we're looking to back it from media language, not representations as such. So we're sidestepping that. This is constructed by the use of lightning iconography and the cartoon editing of brown cracked earth instead of the White House lawn, with large dramatic main cell lines offering what's the worst that could happen. So we've gone and got ourselves our sort of a triple there, and we looked at the language there, maybe even a quad. You look at the language and you look at the font, you look at the brown cracked earth and the lightning iconography, and that's sort of got that real fear about for the environment constructed in it. This positions the educated ABC One left-wing audience to fear and desire information from the expert article inside the magazine to gain a sense of security against the threat they believe he is to the world. All right, so we're linking into that hatred, not hatred, hatred's a little harsh, but maybe that fear, that unease at Donald Trump and his impact on environmental causes. But it's there as quick as we can. And because we're in a media language question, we're making sure we're taking from those little combos in the middle, and we are never talking about representation of, say, Donald Trump as dangerous, more that the danger is constructed by these visual things on the page. So I think it's really important to have that discipline. I am in a representation question. I am allowed to use stereotypes, countertypes, represents. I am in a media language question. I will not use represents, stereotypes, countertypes. It's the best way. You can get away with constructed because construction of ideas is done by media language. But those three words are banned in media language responses. So this is the point where I say do the task. Do the task. Read both models, see how they ensure a link to context in line with the question. So highlight those beliefs and values, or beliefs and values about real world contexts, using different colours like we have in the previous model. So here is our explain question, the first paragraph of which was the paragraph that I modelled for you before. And in an explain question, yes, you've got two paragraphs, but if you can pull out 2 or 3 contexts and link them to media language combos, that's definitely going to put you in all day adequate, and probably with some good combinations there, you're going to get that more sophisticated, convincing media language analysis that's going to be the top mark band. Remember that the bottom of the top mark band is a B, so that'll be all right for you. Do it my way. So let's have a look at the second paragraph here. So the first paragraph goes in there and points out the fears about right-wing populism and the sort of anti-environmental impacts that will have. So there's almost like a double context or a double viewpoints that they have there. The second paragraph, let's think about where else we can take this to say, yeah, we are all over, and at least have a third more convincing spotting of the ideologies and values of the audience. So look, there are also ideologies of socialism and anti-capitalism that are shared between the big issue and their loyal audience. Right, so we've gone socialism, anti-capitalism. They're pretty similar, even if you just went ideologies of anti-capitalism or ideologies of socialism. And we know that we're going to have to pull these out with media language examples to say, well, where did you get this idea that they were worried about capitalism and want the world to be more socialist? So let's go and back that up. This is constructed in the strap lines, a hand up, not a hand out, and the bright yellow ear drawing the left-wing audience towards social trading for goods that they can purchase. So at that point there, when you've got a question like this, you're on the lookout for like, well, how can I tie stuff that's on the page towards stuff that the audience believe and support? And with those there, I mean, you argue that those smaller cell lines and that strap line are a little bit more marginal. But what you will do is go, hang on a minute, these are left-wingers. What can I do to really go, yes, I know that this is what the left-wing audience want from their magazine. So I am taking stuff that arguably is much more around the edge of the publication than the main cover feature with Donald Trump being this wildly dangerous environmental force. Okay, so we've taken from around the edges in the middle of the paragraph. That supports the beliefs they have about, say, socialism, and this reinforces the identity of the left-wing audience as ethical consumers who can help reduce the inequality created by capitalism by making an ethical purchase of the magazine. Oh, well done. So the idea of we're linking to that social mission makes the audience feel better. So that completes our deep dive into contexts and their importance. We know that we should really be bringing in contexts in all of our responses, be it analyse or explain, because they help round out audience, but definitely if the question directly asks for it, as it has here. This should also help you with your lesson 7 submission at the end of this unit. Make sure that you get those contexts in. Right, ta-ta!